What's up, Clever? What shall we do?
Alright, we're live. So I wanted to make this video. There's been a couple requests for kind of an iSwitch tutorial or how to IceStack, so I wanted to, I guess, give my demonstration of how I understand it. So the way I'm going to start this is I'm going to do kind of a breakdown of what you use to IceStack and how to use it effectively. So we're going to start with Icy Shards. That's this skill. That one I actually really like because, well, not for damage. One thing to note for this video, this is a purely support IceStack video. This isn't how to cap damage. This is how to IceStack the most effectively for a raid. And maybe I'll do a little bit of as far as nesting too, but for like solo damage or dailies, you can use a lot of these principles, but this build is not a, I guess, iSwitch damage video at all. This is purely support. If you notice in my tree, I have, I don't have Chilling Mist, I don't have Shatter, a lot of my skills aren't maxed. I grabbed a lot of the fire skills to use for utility. Fireball is cool because it has a lot of damage. I grabbed Hot Rod so I can use it in a raid to move around, because iSwitch or Elementalist doesn't have any movement skills or any jumps, so I grabbed that so I could have something. So one thing to note on my skill levels specifically. So the way, I guess, the ice resist or ice debuff in this game works is that you reduce the ice resist of the boss, and then when you freeze them with the freeze skill, they are the freezes more, so they take more damage the lower their ice resist when frozen. So for example, if they have no ice resist and you just freeze them, as compared to if they have 10% ice resist and you freeze them, they're going to take 10% more damage if they're frozen with the lower ice resist. Pretty basic, pretty straightforward. So the reason I have my skills set up the way they are is because in this game, the skill that has the highest level will kind of take precedence for the ice debuff stack. So I have my Ice Cold Field with the highest level, also because leveling it up increases the freeze duration. So I do Ice Cold Field with the highest level because it has the longest freeze or debuff duration, so I want it to last the longest if I'm going to use it. Icy Shards I have kind of the lowest because it only debuffs for 2 seconds. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage. One thing I really like to do with Icy Shards is you can debuff the boss and then freeze. So it's kind of a mini debuff. Another little rotation to do is, so if T is the boss, you know, you're kind of doing a range freeze, you can cast your Glacial Spike and then cast your Icy Shards right as it goes to hit him, so that way as the Glacial Spike hits him, he's debuffed. So that's kind of a ranged if you can't get close. Normally kind of your bread and butter IceStack is to go use your Icy Gust, Glacial Freeze, or Glacial Spike after the Icy Gust, either one. You know, those are kind of your pretty basic bread and butter moves. And that one I like because it's kind of a range, so you can do that. Boom. So next I have the Frozen Spikes. This one's good because it stays on the field, and so it, you know, lowers their ice resist. It stays on the field, so that way if you're gonna do kind of a longer lasting freeze move like your ultimate or your Frost Chaos, you can go and you can debuff them with this, then cast your Frost Chaos, and then it stays on. It keeps hitting him for that amount of time. Then you refreeze him to keep that ice debuff on. So the Frozen Spikes only last for so long, you know, like it stays out there, what's that, 3 seconds, then it kind of shatters, and then the debuff only lasts for so long after that, and then you need to re-debuff them so you can keep that maximum damage, which is why I followed it up with that, to make sure that they're always, you want the boss to always be debuffed one way or another before you freeze. If you need to get some ice out really quick to burn certain mechanics like Worm, you know, to break super armor, you can do it at the boss in Mist Nest. You know, you can throw up your Frost Chaos really quick to just get the ice out there, then you can debuff. and you wait,
Watch your
debuff again, wait, debuff again, freeze, you know. The idea is you always want to make sure you debuff before you freeze. So let's go over what's a debuff and what's a freeze. Icy shards, only debuffs, 10%. All your ice skills only debuff 10% right now. They used to be 30%, but they changed it. They actually nerfed it a little bit, a lot of it, to where it's only 10% now. So Icy Shards is just a debuff. Ice Cold Field EX is actually a debuff and a freeze. So one thing I'll do with Ice Cold Field is, so you go debuff, Glacial Spike, you know, so they're frozen. Then you right click and so, or then you Icy Gust, so they are debuffed. So I guess they already have the ice resist. And then when you go to do it, so they're debuffed, then you freeze. So that way the initial hit freeze hits on a debuffed enemy and then resets its own debuff, you know, the 12-second debuff from Ice Cold Field. So that way the initial freeze from Ice Cold Field also gets that bonus. Next one is Frozen Spikes. That's just a debuff move, or ice debuff move. That Frozen Spikes does not freeze. Glacial Freeze is a freeze move. It doesn't debuff. It's just a freeze move. Glacial Spike is just a freeze move. No debuff. Ice Barrier. That one is a freeze move, so to speak. You have to wait for how long does it last? Isn't it like 15 seconds or something? You have to wait for the ice barrier to break before it actually freezes, but technically once it does break, then it does count as a freeze. So if you can watch on your buff bar up here at the top left, then you can see the countdown for the ice barrier, and so you can debuff right as it goes off. So that freeze also hits on a debuff boss or a debuffed mob as well. And then one of your best ones is Frost Chaos. That is this one. That one, each one of those little spikes that are going out freezes. It's kind of like shooting out multiple glacial spikes. So every one of those that hits the boss has 40% chance to freeze. So when you're going to burn a raid boss, or it's something to where you have the whole party DPSing, you know, a DPS moment, you want to save Frost Chaos for those moments, because that way you get the maximum amount of freeze, so the boss is always stacked. Because, you know, Glacial Spike or Glacial Freeze, that only freezes, you know, the freeze tick only goes once, and so once that ice is broken, it's gone. But Frost Chaos keeps that on permanently. Your last one is your Ice Ultimate. That one is just a freeze. It lasts for the duration. So you do the initial freeze, and then it lasts until the freeze wears off after the ice is broken. So that one is a really specific, if you really need to, you know, you have a very small, high DPS window, like when you're trying to burn Worm, then that's what you use the Ice Ulti for, because it's guaranteed freeze. There's no, you know, and it just has to be in that radius. So for that one, you'd want to do, like, if you're going to burn Worm, if T is the worm, as it comes up out of the ground, you're going to go up Icy Gust, get that initial freeze, because you always want the first stack, then you Ice Cold Freeze, or Ice Cold Field to get the second layer of ice, and then you would use the Ice Ultimate. I've got it on cooldown. But that way it's 100% or 10% ice debuff for 12 seconds, the longest amount of time that skill has the longest amount of time of debuff of all your skills. And then when they have that 12-second debuff, that's when you would Ice Ulti to make sure, because you're stuck in the move, you can't cast any other debuffs when you're in the ulti, obviously. So a couple of the patterns I like to do, I think that's all the freezes. Yeah, that's pretty much all you've got for your ice skills. I know Shatter is just damage. That actually takes away their ice, so you'd have to restack it after that. And then Chilling Mist is just a debuff. It lasts for, I'm not sure how long it lasts for, but that's just a debuff. And so I actually don't use that because I don't feel that it's needed. That one's kind of for a damage ice switch, which is not what this build is. So now I guess to put it into use, I already showed you kind of my first one. I like to do Glacial Spike, Icy Shards as it hits the boss, because that way the Icy Shards has debuffs them right before it hits, and the icy shard debuffs only last for 2 seconds, and it doesn't stay on the field, which is why you actually really can't do the icy shards, then the glacial spike, because odds are it's gone by then. That debuff is gone. Another bread and butter one I like to use is Icy Gust, Glacial Freeze. Or I do, I guess it doesn't matter which combo you use, you'll kind of get the hang of it as you play with it more. It doesn't matter how you do it, you just want to make sure before you cast a freeze move, you cast a debuff move. So, debuff, freeze. Debuff, freeze. And then, debuff, freeze. That only lasts for 2 seconds. Debuff again. Okay? Debuff again while Frost Chaos is still out. So you want to keep that ice debuff out the whole time while you're doing any freeze. You have plenty of ice debuff moves if you do it correctly. Yeah, you actually have more debuff than you have freeze moves. So you have no excuse not to have the boss debuffed when you freeze him. And then I'll show you with this ice barrier. So, you got the boss, doing a couple bread and butter tricks, debuff, freeze, and then I look in the top left, I see my thing coming, debuff, right as it procs, boom, frozen again. You have a lot of freeze tricks at your disposal. You just want to make sure you use them the most efficient way you can, because you don't have enough ice to cast to have the boss completely ice stacked. Like if I were to try and have T ice stacked the whole time while a party's trying to DPS him, I'm not going to have enough ice moves. So I have to make sure I kind of balance them out. One thing to note is that if you have a boss and so you just want to freeze the boss, boom. If that hits and that freezes, the freeze for Glacial Spike lasts for 4 seconds. That freeze window actually goes down the more the boss gets hit. So it's like if you freeze the enemy and then your whole party's sitting there damaging him, it will break your freeze faster the more hits he takes, which is why you have to use like Frost Chaos or the Ice Ultimate when you're trying to burn something. So you can't just go up to a raid boss and debuff him and then just freeze him. Because the Ice Cold Field freeze lasts for 12 seconds. It's not going to stay frozen for 12 seconds. The ice is going to break. You have to keep it going. Which is why you actually stack different than in a raid than you do a nest, because in a raid you're doing a lot of burning at that peak DPS time, and in a nest you're kind of spreading it out a bit more. So a couple of combos, I've already showed you some of them. So like if the worm were to come out, back how we used to do it in 60 cap, if T was the worm, as the worm jumps out of the ground, if your party is trying to kill him right at the start, so the worm comes out of the ground, he hits the ground, he does his stomp, he jumps up in the air, you do your jump to avoid the mechanic, then when you hit the ground you go up, freeze him, and then you do the glacial freeze, because right at the start people are applying their debuffs, and then right as you do the glacial freeze you follow up the Ice Cold Field, or the Frost Chaos, I'm sorry, then you do Ice Cold Field, and then you do the Ice Ulti. Because that means, in theory, I would do that faster. I was just talking and explaining it. But that way you always have ice on the boss when you're trying to burn that worm, because that's very important, because you cannot damage the worm unless it's ice stacked. A couple skills can, and then a couple skills can do it on certain classes, can hit that armor bar a little bit, but overall you're not going to touch them unless it's got ice stack on. And one thing to note is there are actually 2 layers of ice stack. So I'll kind of explain what that means. When you freeze an enemy, like boom, freeze T, that only hits him for 1 ice stack. You have to follow that up with another ice move before the first ice layer breaks to get the second ice stack. So freeze, freeze. Now if that glacial spike procced, because it's only got it's like 29% chance to actually freeze, yep. So it does like 4 ticks as it goes through the boss before it times out. So you have, in theory, 29% times 4 ticks, so you kind of have over 100% chance to freeze once, if that makes sense, if that math makes sense. So you debuff, you freeze, you put your first stack on, you debuff again, you freeze. Boom, I'm at second stack. I keep the ice cold field out because I want to keep that max. Wait for that to time out. Debuff again, freeze. I never want to lose the ice stack, because if I lose the ice stack, he's down to 1 stack or 2 stacks, and then your party's DPS goes lower. So when you do it, you have to make sure to always keep it at 2 stacks. You can kind of, when you hear the ice breaking, then that's actually the stack breaking. One thing to note is, like, when you have Frost Chaos out and you hear it breaking over and over and over, that's because it's freezing over and over and over, and it's breaking the ice with its own re-ice stack. So it's keeping it at 2, but it is technically breaking it. Just trying to think if there's anything else. As a general rule of thumb, just remember, debuff, freeze. Debuff, freeze. Debuff, freeze. He's already debuffed because Ice Cold Field, freeze. Okay, debuff again, freeze. Debuff, and then we're actually gonna wait for a sec. Okay, now we debuff, freeze, Ice Ulti. That was pretty consistent on 2 full stacks of ice the whole time. So if you're doing like burning a raid boss, then you, in theory, you would have the boss at 2 stacks that whole time. Now if you're doing a nest, you do a little bit different. You kind of you watch the boss. So you do that, you freeze him. I actually did that backwards. Oops, I'm a scrub. You do that, you freeze him, and then you kind of wait. Because when you're in a raid, you have 8 people hitting him, and so you have a whole bunch of damage going out, so it's breaking really fast. When you're in a nest, you just have 4 people, so it's not as bad. So you can kind of wait for a second, so you freeze him, you know, and then you kind of wait, and then you do it again, you know, really big burst time. But the idea behind a nest is his ice isn't going to break as fast, so you don't need to burn your moves as fast, if that makes sense. Because there's no point in you getting him to 2 stacks and then stacking him past that for no reason. So you kind of want to spread it out. And also, if you burn it that fast, you're going to run out of ice to use. So you're going to have a whole lot of ice at the start, and then you're not going to have anything left. Which is why you kind of want to spread it out in a nest.
Concentrate!
I personally, it might be hard to actually show you the damage numbers, but we're going to try. We're going to we're going to kill a flower. And you're going to see as my damage and T's damage, you're going to see how it changes as the ice goes on. In theory, I'm going to keep it at 100% as T's DPSing, because it's only the 2 of us, and I'm obviously not here for damage. So I'm going to watch T's moves, and I'm going to make sure to freeze as he hits it, so he has the most, so he can have the highest DPS. Ready to go?
Over here.
Now our goal for this actually isn't to kill the flower. Our goal is just kind of show how freezing makes, you know, as the boss is frozen, it takes more damage. Even though we probably will end up killing the flower, because that'll give me plenty of examples to show. And T's OP will kill it quick.
Over here.
Ready?
Yep.
So, you want to start with IceStack?
Yep. One thing to know is I just did my ice barrier, so that way by the time that timer runs out, I can probably use that to actually help. So there you go. IceStack. Keep it going. Boom, freeze. So the boss is always IceStack. IceStack. Debuff again. Debuff again. Freeze. Hear all that ice breaking? Freeze. Debuff. Freeze. Debuff. Then ice will. You can actually watch the numbers. You can see how it's taking more damage the higher that the ice stacks get. Debuff. Freeze. There you go, T. There you go, Frost Chaos. That's a good time to where if you're in a nest, or if you're in a raid, obviously, that's going to give you the highest DPS when it's IceStack like that. You know, you can kind of see as I'm doing it, I always make sure I do a debuff move before I do any freeze, because I have a limited number of freeze moves. See, now I'm out of stuff to do, out of stuff to cast. Now I'm going to show you as that timer goes out, I'm going to show you how I'm going to freeze this worm. So debuff, actually debuff again, boom. Now it's frozen. Now we can keep that going. Keep the freeze going. Oop. Debuff, freeze. Debuff, Frost Chaos. You know, I probably shouldn't do that at rings because obviously the party's going to be dodging, but this isn't, I guess, how to kill flower example. This is how to IceStack. Debuff, freeze. Debuff, freeze. So normally if you had a party DPSing, that's kind of about the speed you want to be going for a nest. In a raid, obviously you go a lot quicker. Everything's going to be burnt right at the start and it's going to die. Now watch my ice barrier at the top left. Okay, debuff. Boom, it's frozen. Debuff. Freeze. Freeze. There you go. Debuff again. Debuff. Freeze. Freeze. Alright. Debuff. Freeze. You know, you can start, once you kind of get the hang of it, get the hang of your rotation, you can kind of get the feel of how, or windows you have to where you don't have any freeze up. Your goal as an ice witch is not to DPS. The only reason I have like Fireball and, what's the name of that skill actually? Phoenix Strike? The only reason I have those is because there are times when you don't have anything up to freeze with, so you can throw in a little DPS. Debuff. Freeze. See how I use the Icy Gust into the Ice Cold Field, so that way the Ice Cold Field freeze it as the boss was debuffed, and then it also re-debuffed. There you go. Debuff. Frost Chaos. Boom. Lots of freeze. I actually did that one wrong. That's an example of how not to do it because my Icy Shards debuff had already timed out. See how fast it broke? Now it's not frozen. It lasts longer. The freeze lasts longer, the more debuff it is. Debuff, freeze. And actually certain bosses like this one, I really like the flower example because this one gives you times like the platform to kind of have everything reset. Debuff, freeze. Debuff, freeze. Debuff, freeze. Debuff, freeze. Debuff, freeze. Oh, I actually messed up. There we go. Debuff, freeze. Debuff. Oh, I don't have any freeze to follow it up with. See, so you have more debuffs than you have free skills. Freeze. Nope. Debuff. Freeze. I actually should have used another thing to follow that up with. Normally when I'm not trying to explain it, you know, you'll get to the point where all this stuff just comes naturally. You just think, I need to debuff the boss before I use any freeze skill because it makes it deal 1, makes it deal more damage, and 2, because I have more debuffs than I have freeze skills. So I need to make sure to optimize the freeze skills I do have with my debuffs. Debuff, freeze. ISO, boom. Oh, I'm dead. Ooh, that was some clutch plays right there. It's a little trick. You can use the unstuck to get yourself out of the ISO. Glacial spike, icy shards. Oops, got hit again. Debuff, freeze.
Done.
Freeze. See how it just kind of, you know, when you just sit there and focus on doing it, it just comes really naturally. Really easy to do. Playing an IceStack is not hard. It used to be to where you had different skills that had different debuff amounts, so you had to make sure not to cancel the debuffs out. But now, being that they're all the same, playing an IceStack is not very hard at all. You just gotta get a hang of it. One thing to note is now I'm not freezing here, or not debuffing here, because that Ice Cold Field lasts for 12 seconds. So I have plenty of time to do all the free skills I want because that lasts for so long.
Watch your step. Cool off.
Alright, T, blow it up. Right there I casted the ice barrier so I can, as soon as this mechanic gets done, I can use this to add to my freeze.
Concentrate!
Right There, boom, froze with it.
Done.
We're gonna take the kill. Nope, T got it. One thing to note that this is kind of the same way you would do it before they changed the way the ice stacking works and how the ice debuffs worked, because it used to be to where certain skills would give you a 10% debuff and certain skills would give you a 30% debuff, so you had to make sure not to override the certain skills. But now it's just all at 10%, it's all the same. So you'll have to play with it. Just keep in mind that every time you go to freeze the enemy, freeze the mob, to just make sure it's debuffed. I guess that's kind of the one sentence how to ice witch. Make sure that before you go to freeze the boss is always debuffed.
Watch your step. Right here.
And you can play around with the different ways to do it. You don't have to follow any set path for how to freeze at all. You just have to make sure that every time you go to freeze, it's debuffed. Alright, that's it. I'm gonna wrap it up. Thanks for watching.